What's up, everybody? Welcome to the early tea time live stream presented by Fantasy Points. I'm Hunter Vaness. I'll be your host here today. I'm doing it solo, battling a little allergies problem. I think I feel like Max Homa out here, but just like Max did, I'm going to make it through it, and we're going to do pretty well here today, I think. So, again, welcome to the early tea time live stream, again, presented by Fantasy Points. What a week the Fantasy Points team had last week. I think 3 guys cashed, had the JT outright tickets. Matt had the Rory first round leader as well. So lots of good stuff going on at Fantasy Points. Just, with that week alone, you would have easily paid off for, your subscription. And honestly, I think if you would have taken both of Matt's picks, you easily could have paid off the whole year there too. So congrats to Matt, of course. Congrats to the guys that hit the JT outright. Lots of good stuff going on. As always, again, this week we have Pat with his stat model article out. That's out now as well. My event and course previews out right now. Dom will have his FanDuel picks and a premium betting stream tomorrow, in addition to Matt's DFS show for subs too. The DFS tiers article by Chris Murphy. He produces a really great article each week, just highlighting different tiers in DraftKings and maybe who to target, some of the great pivots as well. We all know that there is certain chalk to avoid, certain chalk that's good. Chris does a really great job of breaking that down in his article each week. And then Matt and Dom's live stream on Wednesday nights, that's really picking up steam as well. They do a great job of breaking down the whole betting board or the betting field, as well as the DraftKings field. It's more of a DFS show, but they talk about everything. They bring up their outright picks as well. It's a really great way to just build your lineups going into Thursday morning, of course. Wednesday night's one of my favorite nights, just because that's when you're sweating ownership percentages. You're really sweating out certain picks as well. That's when a lot of the great content comes out too. A lot of the great shows come on Wednesday night. So one of my favorite nights, one of my favorite streams to watch as well. So that's enough on those guys. Unfortunately, I did not hit one of those tickets. So I will be joining that party here soon, I think. As far as last week goes, what a Sunday from Justin Thomas. I remember looking at his live odds yesterday morning, or I guess before the tournament start or the round started, and I just thought there's no way he was going to come back from the, 7-shot deficit. I think it turned into an 8-shot deficit when the round was going. So, I mean, I loved the odds, of course. I think they're at least 25 to 1. I could be wrong on that, but I wish I would have obviously bit the bullet on that. I was looking more towards Rory. I had a lot of Rory bets. I had a lot of Rory in my lineups as well. He looked really good in that front 9, but he just could not put it together on the back 9. It happens, though, so I couldn't be too upset with that. As far as DFS goes, I probably had a little bit too much Spieth and Cam Smith in my lineups. I probably played a little bit too much chalk as well. Just my own reflection, but we all have our own ways we can improve on from last week, of course. Just going over a little bit of last week, obviously it sucked to see Mito fall down the leaderboard like he did on, really just that last hole. But, thinking about Mito, Cameron Young, Will Zalatoris, those are all like 3 of our DFS darlings that we've all, if you've played DFS in the last 2 years now, you've probably played all 3 of those at least one week. And yet we still don't have a win out of any of them yet. So I know it's going to be coming soon. I just feel like it's going to come when we least expect it. I guess, this last weekend was, of course, that Zalatoris was a little more I could have seen that a little bit more than Mito, of course, but those 3 are going to be around for a long time. I said it in my article, Mito's going to be playing. He's going to be competing in majors for decades, or a decade at least, maybe not 2 decades, but same with Zalatoris. He showed his pedigree. He's got great pedigree in majors, of course. He showed it again this last weekend. And Cameron Young, is there a golf course that he doesn't play well on? He's played well in Birdie Fest. He plays well on the most difficult golf courses. He plays golf courses that require distance. He plays well on courses that require you to lay up. There's really not a course out there that makes me think that he's not a good fit on there. So I think all 3 of those guys, especially, I don't know. I'd love to ask it in the comments, anyone who's watching on YouTube right now. Out of those 3, who would you buy stock in over the next 5 years? I want to say Cameron Young. I think his upside's almost higher than those 3. He's on such a terrific start. His ball, they're all great. Their stats are all pretty great, of course, for their age as well, too. But that's the other thing, too. They're all my age. and they're out here competing in majors or younger too, I believe. So that was the thing that stood out to me. Another thing that stood out was just how many putts Cam Smith missed, as well as Rory on the back nine yesterday, and really throughout the round. Uh, I mean, it's crazy that Rory was 5 under on Thursday, and he really just needed to be even par to make that playoff in yesterday's round. So disappointing for those of us that had Rory. Of course, he was my favorite pick going into the week. Him and Hideki too. He didn't look that great, but I know he had some neck injury concerns. But that's enough on last week. Pretty average week for myself, but we'll look to improve on that, of course. Well, let's go ahead and look at this week. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in a second. We're going to preview Colonial Country Club. We're moving forward to the Charles Schwab Challenge now. Again, this is going to be hosted by Colonial Country Club. It's located in Fort Worth or the Dallas area. Colonial Country Club was designed by Perry Maxwell and John Bredemus. I believe I have that correct. I'm not the greatest with pronunciations, but it was designed in 1936. Said in my article, if you think the Perry Maxwell name is familiar, you are definitely correct. He was the designer of last week's golf course, Southern Hills. He designed that in the mid 1930s as well. Last week's golf course had the restoration by Gil Hans, of course, in 2018. This week's golf course, Colonial, is also going to go through a restoration to make it more like the Perry Maxwell design back in 1936. That's going to happen in 2023. I believe it was supposed to happen this year, but we all know the supply chain issues going on right now, so they pushed that to 2023, just next year. Not sure if they're going to have to push this event to a different course. That's something we'll have to look at 12 months from now, of course. As far as this course goes, it is a par 70 track that measures just over 7,200 yards. So it is a little bit, not a little bit, it is a lot shorter than last week. I'm starting to not really look at distances too much because they're constantly moving these tees, especially recently. I don't know if that's always been a thing, but they're always moving or positioning these tees either, up 30 yards from their original distance. So I don't know if, like last week, the 7,500 yards, I don't know if that's the max distance. I would assume that is. And then they shorten that as the rounds go through, or if they're just changing that up constantly. I'll have to, research that a little bit more. But 7,200 yards, it is a lot shorter, of course, than last week, at least that max distance, like I was saying. But one thing I really like about this week, we're finally back to a event that's been played on a course consistently throughout the years. And that's exactly what Colonial is. It's been the longest running PGA Tour event that's been played on the same golf course, other than, I believe, the Masters is the only one that's been the same for longer than Colonial here. And I guess the Charles Schwab Challenge, but it's been changed through a lot of sponsors over the years. You can find that in my article. I cannot remember those from the life of me now. I know they have some weird, just some weird sponsors that I honestly had not heard of before. So let's move forward here. One of the main defenses of Colonial is the tricky dog legs, very similar to last week. There are quite a few dog legs. I think there was 10 last week, or around the same number this week as well. Ben Hogan's going to be a name that pops up a lot this week in shows and podcasts, that kind of stuff. This golf course is nicknamed Hogan's Alley. Yeah, there we go. Pulling up my notes here. Sorry. Hogan's Alley, just because he's won on this course 5 different times. I believe he won the first 2 or 3 times the event was played on this course. So definitely enough to get your own nickname for the course here. But he said a straight ball at Colonial will get you into more trouble than any golf course that I know. So what he means by that is, again, there's so many dog legs and they're positioned just perfectly to where you cannot bomb it off the tee here. You really need to strategically place your ball in the fairway, of course, to set up those proper angles into the greens, set up those proper approach shots, again, to hit those small greens. And you'll hear that a lot as well this week. There's a lot of small greens at Colonial. Precision and accuracy really needs to be emphasized this week. Fairway accuracy and greens and regulation percentage at Colonial is lower than the tour average. So it's definitely one of those precision and accuracy weeks instead of the Bomber's Paradise courses that we see time to time. I know we go back and forth between those quite a bit, especially in this swing. I feel like we've really been seeing a lot of Bombers courses, and then we switch to these tight fairways, tree line, dog legs all over the place. We've really seen a lot of yin and yang recently, in my opinion. So, another defense of this course is the rough. It's a lengthy 3 inches long. So, keeping your ball in the short grass is really going to be advantageous all week long. Again, the green size is pretty small. It's about 5,000 square feet on average for each one, which is pretty small compared to the tour average. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but Pebble Beach is a course that has a lot of small greens, Harbor Town as well. But the thing that sets Colonial apart, I think, is the long rough. At Harbor Town, the rough is under an inch long, I believe I have written. So as you can see here on the course preview here, again, 3 inches of, let me scroll down here, 3 inches of Bermuda grass for the rough there. The greens are going to be bent grass. There's 84 sand bunkers, 6 water holes, or 6 water hazard holes, I guess you can call them. So there will be some water that comes into play as well. So just another reason to really emphasize accuracy and precision off the tee this week over distance. I really advise you all to pull these fact sheets up yourself, of course, and this is what I've been doing. I've just been writing all of these stats down in an Excel spreadsheet over the last 18 months now, and that's what's really helped me, in my own brain, figure out what are some comp courses to, what we're seeing week in and week out. So, I know Pebble Beach, again, Harbor Town has really small greens, but then it's really important to me, I guess, to compare Harbor Town has really short rough compared to, what we're going to see this week at Colonial. You really, really need to set it in the put your ball in the fairway at Harbor Town. You can, yeah, I said it in the live stream back then too. You can kind of miss the fairway as long as you have the correct approach or the correct angle going into the green. I mean, most of the time it's going to be in the fairway, right? But if you're just a little bit outside of the fairway, as long as you have that correct angle, you're not going to be in too much trouble. Whereas Colonial, I mean, if you're going to be in the rough, if it's 3 inches long, like they say it is here, that's similar to what we saw a couple weeks ago at the Wells Fargo. That was really long rough, and we saw guys just completely catapult up the or down the leaderboard. Just because every time you hit in that rough, it essentially eliminates any birdie opportunities, especially if you are a short hitter, which that's just kind of how it goes. So I don't think guys can bomb it off the tee this week. I do think a lot of guys are going to be keeping driver in the bag on certain holes just because you need to set it up, properly right in the fairway, hit that right angle into the dog leg, obviously hit these small greens. So I do think approach is going to be important this week as well. It's going to be a second shot golf course, just like most of courses, of course. But yeah, that's just my opinion here. We'll look at some stats here in a little bit. So yeah, I think that's all I got. I don't have a whole lot of comp courses. Again, Pebble Beach, Harbor Town have those small greens. I know PGA Tout had Sedgefield. He was talking about that one. I definitely would agree with him on that one too at the Wyndham. So that's what I would look at, but I'm not a huge course comp guy. I guess that's something I could probably improve on, but those would be two that I look at. Pebble Beach, Harbor Town, those smaller greens. That's what I'm looking at. So I think Tom Hoagie and Jordan Spieth were two winners at those two events this year. Jordan Spieth is a great player at both of those courses, and he's the best course history, or he has the best course history at Colonial too. So it makes sense why he has done so well, on all three of these courses or all three of these events. So let's take a look at some of these pivotal holes. I'm going to switch the view over. And we are looking at Colonial Golf Course or Colonial Country Club. You can find this on the PGA Tour website. I'm just going to go through hole by hole, just highlight a few things that I think are important. You can find a deeper write-up on a few of the pivotal holes in my course preview and event preview on Fantasy Points. Again, use that code Vaness22. Vaness22, 2 N's and 2 S's for a discount on Fantasy Points. However, that article is free week in and week out. Okay, so let me make sure this is up. Cool. If you have any questions about any holes or guys, we'll look at the field here in a little bit. As always, throw it in the YouTube chat. We're going to break down some of these pivotal holes now. So I'm not going to go through all 18 holes. You're not here for a hole-by-hole breakdown, of course, but I do think Colonial is a pretty cool golf course, and I just had some notes on a lot of these holes, so we'll highlight them. Obviously, I'll go over the field, but there's plenty of shows, especially on Fantasy Points, that dives deeper into the DFS picks and that kind of stuff. Of course, I'll give you mine here in a little bit, but I really do want to highlight the beautiful golf course that we're going to see this week, just so you can have an idea of, you know, how many dog legs there truly are, as well as what some of these green complexes look like and how well defended they are. So the very first hole is a straightforward dogleg par five. I think it's 565 yards. It's one of only two par fives on the course. The course is really well bunkered around the greens, as you can see in this picture here. I believe there are four. There's also two right here too. That will really make those layup shots a little more dangerous. But this, out of both par fives, this is the one that is eagleable, or at least reachable in two. However, it only sees eagles about 2.3% of the time. So yes, players are able to reach it, but do we see eagles very often? I guess 2%'s, not too low, at least for eagle percentages. But you're not going to see a whole lot of threes on par fives this week, because the other one is 600 plus yards. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So, most players will probably be laying up, hitting the sand wedge here into the green. This is the easiest hole on the course. And the second hole here is the second easiest hole on the course too. And we'll look at that here next. So again, the second hole is the second easiest. So, if you're starting on hole one, and I think I wrote this down, I'm pretty sure I got this from Pat Mayo's show last year. I just wrote it on my Excel sheet. Hole 18 is also really easy. So if you're playing Showdown this weekend, you might want to target guys who are starting on hole 10 and can potentially rack up the birdie streak, the 3-in-a-row birdie streak, especially in Showdown purposes. Of course, in Classic, everyone's going to be having those opportunities on Thursday and Friday, depending on which wave you're in or which hole you're teeing off on, which for each one. But that's just one way you could potentially separate yourself. Again, that's full credit to Pat Mayo. I'm pretty sure I listened to that part last year. So, yeah. Okay. So, the second is a short par four that sees birdies about 26% of the time. I know it says 23% right here, but Fantasy National has that at 26, I believe. You can see really well defended greens with that pure white sand. I really think this golf course is really well maintained. The sand is almost perfect. It's very white. All of these golf courses are going to be in pristine condition every time we see them, but this one really caught my eye. So holes 3 through 5 are going to be what's known as the horrible horseshoe. You've likely heard about that already. If not, you'll hear about it all week, at least on the broadcast, of course. They really do set up in a horseshoe where you start on hole 3, turns into a dog leg left, I believe. Hole 4 stretches to, north and south, and then hole 5 makes that horseshoe shape. And I think that one is a dog leg right. So I could be wrong here. We'll go over it here now. So the third hole is 483 yard par 4. It actually turns into a dog leg left after a strategically placed tee shot. The long approach shot to the green, surrounded by 3 bunkers, limits the birdie opportunities, as golfers again only see birdies about 11% of the time on hole 3 here. So this stretch of 3 holes is definitely one of the more difficult ones on the course. You can see it with the distance too. It makes sense that the longer holes are going to be some of the more difficult ones. But as it says here, it's the beginning of the horrible horseshoe. Move on to hole 4 here next. This is going to be a long par 3. It's 241 yards. I think Fantasy National has it 247. I'll have to double check on some of these yardages, but either way, it's going to be really long. It's going to take a long iron to get it there. It's the longest par 3 on the course. It is the only par 3 at Colonial to not see a hole-in-one in its 76-year history that the event has been played on the course. So that's pretty impressive, or maybe unimpressive. I don't know what you call that, but it means it's definitely a monstrous hole. We saw another long par 3 at Southern Hills. I think that was hole 8 that, I don't know. I never saw what the stats were on that, but that was playing bogey golf most of the time, I believe. So I don't know if we'll see that as much this week. As you can see here, it is bogey 26% of the time. I'm sure if the wind is gusting this week, like it's projected to or forecasted to on the weekend, we could really see some high scores on hole 4. It's just a really long hole. It's a small green there, a couple bunkers there in the front, as you can see. I can just see it playing really tough, especially if the wind is blowing. Fifth hole is a 481-yard par 4. Players must be precise off the tee. You can see there's a ditch to the left of the fairway, and there's a river to the right, making one of the water hazard holes. Number 5 here. You have to have the perfect tee shot to reach the green in 2 on this hole, which is pretty tough if you think about it for just a par 4. If you're looking to hit, you know, par on this hole, you have to have a really great tee shot. This hole sees bogeys per round over, or it says 25% here. I think that's about right. Fantasy National, I believe, had 23. So a couple of different stats that I'm going off of. But either way, it's a tough hole. You're going to see a lot of bogeys. Again, that tee shot has got to be precise. Let's move on to the 6th hole. So once you finally get out of this horrible horseshoe, you finally get to a shorter par 4. It is a lovely 407-yard par 4. It's a dogleg right with another elevated green. You'll see a lot of elevated greens this week on a lot of these holes. Again, this course is immaculate. You can see, again, just the white bunkers here. The trees are even, kept up in awesome condition year in and year out. Lots of bunkers on this course. You can see them there, and they're really in great shape too. I think it's going to be difficult. Sand save is not really something that I'm always looking at, because if you're picking outright winners, sand save should be irrelevant because they should be hitting the greens all the time, right? But if you're looking for value plays, especially in DFS, or honestly, it's just a great stat to use if you want to cancel some names out. If you're going between a couple of guys, you can't make that last decision, maybe pull up their sand save percentage. If some guy is really, a lot worse than the other one, maybe that's a place that you can use it, as an advantage, of course. So again, hole 6 here, you're going to see another elevated green. Again, you'll see that quite a bit. It can be a very tricky green, like it says. All right, hole number 7 here. We're not going to go through all 18, but I do like this front 9 quite a bit. Hole 7, par 4, 434. Probably a par hole in my opinion. You can see it's pretty split between birdie and bogey. This to me is another hole that could be a little bit difficult, if the wind picks up, but we'll see what happens this weekend. Hole number 8, we got another par 3. This one's coming in at 175. It is the par 3 8th hole. It has some really nasty bunkers and trees that guard the green. The green slopes from the back to the front there. I guess, yeah, I would say 4 bunkers here. I can't tell if that's a mini bunker or not, but you can tell there's a lot of trees here in this course. It's a lot of tree line fairways, especially on this par 3 here too. They also overhang a little bit too. So depending on where this pin position is, especially if it's on that right side, we could really see some high scores on this hole as well. I do think par is going to be it's going to be a great score, especially on these par 3s, as it usually is. Moving forward to hole 9 here. 9th hole measures another one that kind of changes. I have it at 407, I believe, on Fantasy National, but I have to double check on that. Pretty short par 4 out of, in comparison to the other ones. The pond in the front of the green makes short approach shots risky and will cause a few double bogeys throughout the weekend, if the wind picks up or if players get really careless. Rather short compared to other par 4s. This hole actually sees quite a few double bogeys, as you can see here, 6% of double bogeys. However, it is pretty birdieable as well. It's a great risk reward hole. It is short, so it's not like, but it is short, but it's not in the range where you can drive it. You really wouldn't want to drive it anyways because there's so many, hazards here. But again, another hole, if the wind's picking up, I would not want to be, chipping from this bunker into a, pin position that's right here when the water's sitting right there, especially if the wind's gusting like it's forecasted to. So yeah, hole 9 looks like it could be tricky. I would definitely hit a couple water balls here, or water balls here, I would assume. Okay, hole 10, 381-yard dogleg right. Again, yardage is going to be off. I need to get the the specific yard up. I'll go off of what the tour has here. 406 yards. It is the second toughest hole on the back nine, like it says there. Like Harbortown, like Pebble Beach, Colonial is a really narrow, again, shot maker's course. You do not need to bomb the ball to score well here. What you do need to do though is hit, around trees, and you got to be smart with your club selection. So that's why I think fairways gained, good drives gained is really going to be emphasized this week, especially when you're building your own model. You got to hit the fairways, and you got to set up those proper shots. Just because there's so many dog legs here. That's another dog leg right for this hole here. So got to be smart with your club selection on this hole, especially on all of these dog legs. Moving on to hole 11. This is the other par 5. It's the monstrous 600 yard, over 600 yard, par 5. You really don't see too many eagles here. It says 0%. I think that's like 0.3 or something like that. Most players will lay up here, try to get that birdie opportunity. You've got to find birdies on this course because, again, par is going to be a really good score, especially on those par 3s, on those longer par 4s. So, anytime you get to a par 5, it's got to be, birdie in your mind, especially when it's longer like this. Eagles really don't come too often. So I do think a lot of players will be laying up here. We're going to see a lot of wedges this week, in my opinion. The 12th hole is a 400-yard par 4 dog leg right. And I will switch the hole or the picture here, as you can see. It has an elevated green as well. It is protected by trees and incredible bunkers. This green is the smallest green on the course, which is saying something at Colonial. Again, 5,000 square feet on average. That's pretty small compared to the tour average. The 12th hole is the smallest green. You can see it there. Pretty well defended as well. You can see the trees there too. Going to have a lot of precision this week. Got to be factored into your model. Let's skip ahead a little bit here. We're going to go to hole 15 now. Hole 15 is another par 4. It's 425 yards. This one is a dog leg right. Tee shots will kick right to left off the sloping terrain there. You can kind of see it in the picture. There's a creek that guards the left side of the elevated green. You can kind of see it there in the background as well. So going to be a tricky hole, I think. Another hole where par is probably a pretty good hole. A lot of these are split between birdie and bogey percentages again. If you're walking away with par in some of these, you're probably going to be happy. You got to find your scoring opportunities on those easy holes. 1, 2, 17, 18, the par 5, 11. Those are going to be your birdie holes most likely. Moving on to 17, and then we'll talk about the finishing hole, and then we'll get over to some stats and look at the field a little bit. 17 is a 773, 77 has here on PGA Tour. Par 4 that gets progressively narrower as you approach the green. And you also need to keep your ball to the left as trees come up the right side. It is a short hole, but it is another, risk reward, dangerous hole. You can see the trees kind of, coming in on the right side there. Also on the left there, they are overhanging a little bit there too. So I would assume many players are going to lay up into this area here, get a nice little wedge into the small green. Well defended with bunkers once again. Going to have to be precise here. And the 18th hole, we're going to see a really nice finishing hole. You're going to see water on the reason I'm laughing, I'll talk about it here in a second, but you're going to see water here on the right side, couple of bunkers there too. I think it's a really great finishing hole, especially if the wind is up too. We could see some doubles potentially, especially if, players are hitting that water, but 35 yards, it's not the longest par 4. It probably is scoreable as well. We could see some fireworks on this final hole. Hopefully not as crazy as what we saw yesterday, at least for, Mito backers purposes, but I think it could be a great finishing hole. The reason I was laughing is 2008, I believe it was, when Phil Mickelson won. He hit in his, final putt on the 72nd hole, and you can get a nice video of some guy just doing a cannonball into the pond here, right in the background. I'll see if I can find a video of it maybe later. But yeah, it makes me laugh each time I think about it. So. Okay, so yeah, that's a little hole-by-hole breakdown here. It's something I haven't really done before. Trying something new, I guess you could say. with this event and course preview, I don't have the most information yet because I don't have ownership percentages. I think that's huge for DFS. Um, of course, betting numbers are out, but we have a lot of great shows that highlight those. Of course, I'm going to go through my picks at the end, but I really want to break down courses as best as I can. Maybe give you a couple examples of holes that you'll see, because just going through the course myself helps me at least feel confident knowing that, yeah, accuracy is going to be really important this week. And keeping your ball in the fairway is extremely important, especially when you see holes like that 17th hole here with trees that, guard the fairway. You do not want to be hitting into those trees like I do each week that I play golf. So, yeah, it's something I just want to try. Let me know if you like it or if I should just stick to the picks. So some key stats, and you can see my stat, breakdown in my article. You can also see Pat James' great stat model article on fantasy points. For fantasy point subs, again, use that promo code VANESS22, two N's and two S's. So some key stats. So I looked at off the tee and I added a little emphasis on fairways gained. 11 of last year's top 20 finishers at Colonial hit at least 70% of fairways. Driving accuracy has got to be prioritized over distance this week. Again, if you're hitting the long rough, you're essentially eliminating, most of your birdie opportunities, unless you're a really great long iron player that can hit out of the rough there. So I just don't think 3 inches of rough is no joke. We saw it again at Wells Fargo. We'll see how players react to it this week. Could always be wrong. So, top 5 players in strokes gained off the tee with fairways gained. It's going to be Jason Kokrak, which makes sense, right? He won last year, so I can see why he ranks at the top of this here. Shez Reavie, number 2, Lucas Glover, Billy Horschel, number 4, and Justin Rose. Of course, this is for this year's stats, but the fact that Kokrak, ranks at the top of the stat there just at least confirms that it's going to be important this week. Not only do you need to hit the fairway, but you also want to be gaining strokes off the tee just in general. I don't want guys that are just plodding it across the fairway and not actually getting anywhere with the ball. So, yeah, I still want to emphasize strokes gained off the tee, not just hitting fairways. I'm not going to go through all of these. Again, you can find it on Fantasy Points. Scrambling, I do think is going to be important. Adam Hadwin, Brian Harmon, Troy Merritt, they all finished top 10 last year due to their incredible ability to save par. All 3 ranked inside the top 10 in scrambling percentage. As of right now, the top 5 players in scrambling percentage this season or in the last 24 rounds are Christian Bezuidenhout, who burned me bad last week, really burned me bad. I cannot get him right. He plays great on Birdie Fest, which he's not supposed to according to the stats, right? And then he sucked on the bogey avoidance course, which everyone else besides Noren, who also played, who does well in that stat, did well this last weekend. So Bezuidenhout, depending on his price, I guess I don't know where he's at in DraftKings. I wouldn't bet him outright. Probably bet more of a top 40 play, but he ranks number 1 in scrambling. Daniel Berger, number 2. Justin Thomas, 3, Denny McCarthy, 4, and JT Poston coming in 5th here, who I believe has decent results here. So might be a name to look into. 12 of the 18 holes are par 4s. 9 of them measure 445 yards or less. These are the best scorers in the field on par 4 holes. We have Justin Thomas again, Scotty Scheffler, Brian Harmon, Victor Hovland, and Jordan Spieth. I do think putting is going to be important this year. I'll look at the last 5 winners here in a second. Kokrak was the best putter on tour last year when he won. Kevin Kisner, Kevin Na, Daniel Berger, Jordan Spieth. I think, Phil Mickelson. Is Phil a great putter? I'll have to pull up his career stats, but at least when he won, of course it's been different since then. But I'll have to look, how he was putting in 2008 when he won. I do think you need to be a good putter to do well here. Phil Mickelson actually has really great results at Pebble Beach too. So I do think that Pebble Beach comp could definitely come into play this week. So top 5 players in strokes gained putting on bent grass greens. That's what we're going to see this week. We have Beau Hossler, number 1, Troy Merritt, 2, Zach Johnson, 3, Brandt Snedeker, 4, and coming in 5th is Ian Poulter, who has great results here. Top 10 players in strokes gained total at Colonial. I do think Course history is going to be important. We haven't seen a course with, relevant course history in quite a bit, actually. Honestly, since Augusta, in my opinion, maybe, you know, you could say the Byron Nelson since we played that in the year beforehand, but TPC Potomac, the Mexico Open, last week at Southern Hills PGA Championship. We've been playing on a lot of newer courses, or again courses that we haven't seen too often. So I did a really big course history section in my article. I'll highlight that here in a little bit, but that's something I really want to highlight each week, at least on courses that we can, use as relevant information. So, top 10 players in strokes gained total at Colonial of players that are playing here are Jordan Spieth, number 1, Kevin Na, 2, Justin Rose, 3, Kevin Kisner, Tony Finau, Charlie Hoffman, Brian Harmon, Webb Simpson, Colin Morikawa, and Danny Lee. I believe none of those players have WD'd yet. So that's another thing you'll probably want to look out for. Any WDs. I do think we're kind of in the swing of the golf season now, though. So I don't know. It's not like players are moving very far. Of course, we were just in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're just going down south to Dallas, which, by the way, Texas is so big. I drove from the north part of Texas down to the south, the very south point. It probably took 12 hours. It was just as long as going from Nebraska to Texas. So it's big, like they say. So tournament history here. Again, Jason Kokrak won his second event of the season last year at the Charles Schwab. Again, he was the number 1 putter on the PGA Tour last year when he entered the field. He, battled back and forth with Jordan Spieth going into the final round. Spieth was actually winning going into the round, but he shot a +3 in that final round, so he fell back quite a bit. I believe he finished second. That was his third runner-up at Pebble Beach. He also has a victory in 2016 too. So that's Spieth, though. Kokrak ranked first, in strokes gained off the tee, 8th in strokes gained approach, 7th in strokes gained putting. So he really had the all-around performance, and I think that's what we can expect to see. Each time that we play here, a really well-rounded player that doesn't have many holes in their game. Of course, it's not a bomber's paradise where all the bombers are going to be at the top of the field. You really need to have an all-around game. You got to be a great, off the tee player that can put it in the fairway, of course, but you also need to have great approach game because these greens are small. And if you aren't hitting the greens, especially if it's windy, you're going to have to be a great scrambler too, especially out of the sand. So you've got to have the all-around game, and you also need to be a decent putter. Last 5 winners of the tournament: Jason Kokrak, Daniel Berger, Kevin Na, Justin Rose, maybe not the best putter out of this group, but Kevin Kisner too. All of these guys have really solid putting performances, at least in their career year-to-year stats. So all of them have been decent putters. Not sure on Justin Rose, but Jordan Spieth, another winner too, that's done well here. He's typically a good putter. Hasn't been playing too well, at least putting, or he hasn't been putting well recently, but his tee to green game has been really impressive. So I don't see really a reason to go away from Spieth this week. That's really all I got to say about the last 5 winners. Again, you can see more on that in the article on Fantasy Points. Right now, I think that's all I got to say here. As far as course history goes, I think the main 3 to look at are going to be Jordan Spieth, Kevin Na, and Brian Harmon. As we typically see with these relevant course history courses, such as Colonial, right? Such as Augusta. Trying to think of some other ones that are really important, but I think we'll probably see it next week at Memorial too. That probably another course that has relevant course history. You're going to see high ownership from all these guys in DFS. So you got to make that decision. In my opinion, do you think this golfer can, depending on the price, right? Do you think they can top 5? Can they win? And all 3 of these guys can obviously do that, right? Jordan Spieth, Kevin Na, Brian Harmon. Spieth has incredible results here. Kevin Na is 4th in total rounds played at Colonial. I think he's only missed a cut twice here, but he's gained strokes tee to green every time in his 14 events on the course. So the 2 times that he missed the cut were just because he putted like trash, and we rarely see that from Kevin Na. So I think he's a really safe play. Brian Harmon too. He missed his cut in his very first start at Colonial, but he's made the weekend 8 times in a row since then. He's got 3 top 10s. He had a T8 last year. He was positive in every single stat category. So these three are going to be really popular, in my opinion. We'll see. The top of the field is pretty loaded, so I don't know if speed's going to be like untouchable by any means. But I do think Kevin Na, Brian Harman, they're already getting steam this week. They're going to be pretty popular in DFS. So again, you got to make that decision. Do you think this guy can? I don't know. We can debate on this, right? But do you think he can top 10, top 20? Because if they're finishing T34 at 20% ownership, you're probably holding hands with a lot of people. There's going to be better plays out there. You can't tell me that there's not going to be a guy $200-300 cheaper than them that's going to score or place better than T34. And again, I could see all three of these guys finish in top 10. I definitely think Spieth's a pretty safe bet for top 10. He's just been playing well. There's no reason not to expect that out of him on a course that he's played so well at. But again, when DFS or in DFS purposes, again, Kevin Na, Brian Harman, when it comes to chalky plays like that, I tend to lean more towards a placement bet. Unless you think they're going to win outright, then go ahead, bet them outright, of course. But I would probably try to hedge more with a placement bet and go elsewhere in DFS. That's just my personal strategy. I know everyone's got different um, strategies, right? Because put them in a top 40, top 30 bet. They finish T26. They're not killing you in DFS because they're 20% owned. And as long as you found the right pivot, right, you are getting ahead of the field in that aspect. But you're also not losing money on what seems like a really safe play too. So that's just me thinking out loud. I'm still improving my process, at least when it comes to placement market or the placement market and placement bets. But that's just a way to like avoid the chalk in DFS, but also feel okay about it, right? Like I'm fading, 15% super safe in my opinion, Kevin Na, right? However, if say Kevin Na, Brian Harman fall on their face and miss the cut this weekend, you're really getting a lot of leverage. Yes, you missed out on the placement bet, but holy cow, you're really getting a major step above the field in DFS. So I could be wrong on that. You can obviously call me out on that, but that's just how I'm starting to do it. So other course history options to consider, Colin Morikawa, great history here. Tony Finau too. Chris Kirk's going to be highlighted all week. Justin Rose, Charlie Hoffman's only missed one cut in 13 starts. Ian Poulter, all 6 of these guys have only missed one cut in all of their events. So I'm sure there's a couple others that I'm probably missing, but if you're a big course history guy, especially if some of these guys are lower owned, Tony Finau, he's not in the greatest form recently, but I don't see him, $9,100 on DraftKings. I think he's 40-1, I believe, in the betting market. Got that pulled up here now. Yeah, Tony Finau, you can get him at 41-1. He's probably more of a DFS play for me just because I think he's going to be overlooked. Runner up in 2019, 6 out of 6 made cuts. His worst finish in those 6 starts is T34, so I think he can definitely do better than that. Form's not the greatest, but he did well at the Mexico Open. It's just the putting with him, and I don't know. I could see him. I guess I've been talking about so much about how important putting is. Maybe I talked myself out of that, but it could be a decent leverage play. And Ian Poulter too. I don't see him being higher than 8%. I could be wrong. Low owned, $7,200, I believe, when I checked. 7 out of 8 made cuts. T3 last year. 2 other top 10s. I guess he's got the decent history last year, so that could push him above 10%. But yeah. As far as weather goes, I think it's going to be pretty pristine, pretty decent, I guess, on the first couple of days. Looks like it's going to be 5 to 15 miles per hour. The weekend looks pretty rough right now, though. It seems like winds are projected to hit 15 to 20 miles per hour. Wind gusts could hit 35 miles per hour. As far as, I don't know what you do with this, I guess. We don't have to worry about wave stacking, though, because I do think, at least right now, things can change, of course, but I think the first 2 days are going to be relatively even, maybe a couple of mile per hour change, between the morning and the PM, but that's nothing too crazy to go off of. I mean, Justin Thomas just won last week in a pretty terrible weather draw. So You just got to make your own decisions there, of course. I don't think weather's going to be too crazy, at least in the first couple of days, right? That's what matters because once the weekend hits, then maybe that's something we go off of, right? Is we try and get guys that can hit the the cut number. Um, let's just think this out loud, actually. So I think the first couple of days are going to be relatively easy, maybe not easy, but easier compared to the weekend. So I think that cut line could probably get close to even par. In the last I have 20 years here. I think it should be last 10 years. No, last 20 years. Yeah, that's what Fantasy National had pulled up. The cut line's been between -1 and +5. So, if the weather's not too bad, if the greens aren't too firm, I could see that being closer to even or -1. Whereas, when the weekend starts to come, then you want your wind warriors. You want your guys that can, um, you know, bogey avoidance. I think is going to be important over the weekend, especially. So, not that we need to target birdie or better. Well, again, there's a lot to think about, of course, but I do think the weather is not going to be too bad in those first couple of days, and then it's really going to pick up over the weekend. And I think bogey avoidance will be much more important on Saturday and Sunday. So, do that with what you want. Find guys that can make the weekend right, who aren't going to blow up in the first couple of days. They're pretty safe to make the weekend, and then you got to know that when the wind picks up, they're not also going to explode because of terrible weather conditions too. So yeah, again, kind of thinking out loud there, but that's just kind of how I see it. Okay, so we went through quite a bit here. I also have my essential questions in the Fantasy Points article. The two things that I'm considering, or at least thinking about this week. First off, do we need to worry about a post major hangover, right? Do we need to worry about how taxing and grueling Southern Hills was for certain players? I think there's a lot of X factors this week with that, like Mito Pereira, right? What do you do with Mito? I mean, you could literally make an argument for him winning this tournament because he played so well last week. Why wouldn't he carry that momentum? Or you could make an argument that he's going to be +6 in the opening round on Thursday because he's so let down from what happened on that final hole. I would probably lean towards him performing well. Even contending this week, I would not be shocked by that. It's another golf course that kind of fits him a little bit. He's more of a bogey avoidance guy, in my opinion, compared to a birdie scorer. But I think he's an X factor. I don't really know what to do with him yet. And a lot of those guys, again, that did really well. What do you do with Justin Thomas, right? He's at least got more of a track record, whereas Mito, we don't really know how he's going to handle, um, what happened yesterday. He's never been in this position where he's blown a lead on the 18th hole, in a major on a Sunday, right? So, and we don't really have much track or history on many guys that do that. So, which again makes you feel for the kid, but um, yeah, we'll see. He's a major X factor. I don't think there's I don't, again, with these essential questions, I never really have a strong opinion on them because they're essential questions, right? They're X factor questions. Like if I knew the answer to these questions, I would obviously tell you and I would, be banking off of them, right? But I think they're X factor questions that no one really knows, right? No one knows how Mito's going to do this week. Mito doesn't even know yet because it's not Thursday yet. He could be in a completely different headspace than what he is right now on Monday, right? So, again, with these essential questions, they're more X factor stuff for me. I never have answers to them just because they are, again, a little bit unpredictable. And I think sometimes can really decide how the tournament's going to go, right? Guys that went through the grueling test of Southern Hills last week might be exhausted and might not be ready for another grueling test that we'll see at Colonial. So who knows? We'll have answers to those on Sunday, of course. Other essential question: are there any similarities between Southern Hills and Colonial? I'll let you read that on Fantasy Points. Both, Perry Maxwell designs. I, think we could see some similarities. I think it's going to be difficult. Greens, dog legs between both courses. I think the main difference, though, is the narrow fairways here at Colonial. So some early betting targets, and with these betting targets, I try not to write, Justin Thomas and Chris Kirk on these because one, it's not fun for me because there's gonna be so much content out there about these guys. I don't want to hold hands with a lot of the other content creators. Of course, I'm trying to, be a little bit different, but also find, for example, Sungjae Im. I feel like people might have forgotten about him, right? I hope that the world hasn't, or the betting world hasn't forgotten about Sungjae, but he just tested. I think he tested positive for COVID. I tried to read into that more. I wasn't sure if he actually tested positive for it or if he just had crazy protocols. He was playing in South Korea. He was going to tee it up in a home town or a home country event, right? But I believe he did actually test positive for COVID. Do with that what you want. I don't know. I don't think it's really going to impact him. We'll see. Again, I'm just kind of taking a flyer here. He's 40-1, I believe, is one of the best numbers that you can get on him. 35-1 now. So Sanjay's been playing so well, though. He's a great example of a golfer who has just about no weak points in his game. I think approach is his worst stat, but he still ranks in the upper field, or the upper half of the field in that stat. In approach. So all the other stats in the last 24 rounds, he's top 20. It's green all across the board. That's really, something that I'm looking at this week. If you have any questions, let me know, please. We are getting close to the end here. A couple other guys that I like. Abe Answer, really going off of the Texas narrative here. He tends to have the crowd behind him at these events. He also plays pretty well at these Texas, the Oklahoma events like he did last week at Southern Hills. He ranked 12th in strokes gained approach last week, 13th in strokes gained tee to green, 15th in strokes gained putting. He finished T9 at the PGA Championship. He really, again, I said it in the article, but he answered any questions about his current form, heading into this week. He's never missed a cut here. He's got back-to-back top 14s or T14s, literally finished tied for 14th in the last 2 years. So fits the course history narrative. He's playing in decent form. Pretty good price on DraftKings as far as DFS goes. 40-1, not a bad number in my opinion. Up on DraftKings looks like. I like Answer quite a bit. Tom Hoge, couple reasons why I like him. Also going off of the Texas narrative here, he played golf collegiately at TCU, which is located just under a mile away from Colonial. He doesn't really have eye-popping results here. He did miss the last 2 cuts, but he does have a couple of decent finishes in the 3 starts before that. But I think we can all agree that Tom Hoge's playing the best golf of his career right now. So I don't think we should, take him out just because of his missed cuts in the last 2 years. And honestly, I hope that lowers his ownership. I know he's kind of getting some buzz already, but I hope that the 2 missed cuts lower his ownership because there's no doubt in my mind he's playing the best golf of his career. He's got a win this year, so that kind of cements that. But his wins at Pebble Beach, which again has those smaller greens, I think will be important, or will be something that we can go off of, I guess, this week. Again, small greens. Accuracy is also important at Pebble Beach. Again, it has that Jordan Spieth comp all over it. So I like Tom Hoge quite a bit. And Davis Riley. If I had to pick one player, who's not or who hasn't played here in the past or a debutant here, it's got to be Davis Riley. He's starting to give Cameron Young a run for Rookie of the Year. He had a really solid performance at the Zurich with his former roommate, Will Zalatoris. But ever since then, he's just rattled off, back-to-back-to-back top 10s. He finished well at the Mexico Open. He also finished well at the Byron Nelson, too. Those are 2 birdie fests. And he finished T13 last week on a difficult golf course at Southern Hills for the PGA Championship. And I completely faded him. I just didn't think a lot of these young guys were going to do as well as they did. Maybe it's just the fact that it's the PGA Championship. We don't really see that at Augusta, and maybe that's what I was thinking about so much. But, those younger guys really showed out. They proved me wrong, and they showed me that they can play on, multiple golf courses. A lot of the time, those Korn Ferry Tour guys, they take a little bit, besides the elite, right, like Davis Riley, Cameron Young, Zalatoris, right, Pereira. But a lot of the time, they just, you see them pop in birdie fest, and then they just completely explode in these majors. You see very high scores, which we still saw, right? But I think, those 3 especially, in addition to Davis Riley, too, solid rookies that I think all 4 of those guys, you've got to consider betting every week until they win because they are popping. And it's going to happen. There's no way that, those 4 are way too good not to win sometime on the tour in the near future. Couple other guys, I'm not going to dive into them, but I'm going to likely look into in as far as betting goes. I'm probably going to go back to my old strategy of just bet Hovland and Morikawa, like I used to for just about every event when I first started doing this, and it paid off actually for quite a while. We haven't seen a win from either of those two in quite a bit, at least as far as their standards go. Morikawa has great results here. Hovland has a T20 in his one start here. He didn't play last year. um, I don't know if Morikawa will be popular. I don't know if Hovland's starting to get forgotten a little bit. He might get squeezed out at the top just because there are really great players, of course, at the top of the field here. 20 to 1 on Hovland, I think that's a pretty good number, especially if one of these guys, such as JT, withdraws. I would assume that number drops a little bit. Ryan Palmer, I'm going to look into him as well. I think he's going to be a great placement bet. Again, Brian Harmon, Kevin Na, all those guys that I listed off for course history, I'm likely going to look into the placement market on those. Ian Poulter again. Let me just list those off really quick. Justin Rose, Chris Kirk, going to be really popular in DFS this week, I would assume. Charlie Hoffman, that might be a flyer. He hasn't been playing great, but he's only missed one cut out of 13 starts. Um, so yeah, I like Palmer as well, riding that Texas narrative. And then I do like Justin Rose too. Probably going to be playing him in DFS. We'll see where that ownership shakes out. So before we get out of there, are there any questions from the YouTube chat? Anything I can answer for you all? I do want to actually pull up ownership before we head out here quick if we can. But, really appreciate you all watching week in and week out. That's what, really makes this enjoyable for me is the interaction that I get with you all on Twitter. The show that we had with the Model Maniac last week was a lot of fun. We had a lot of great feedback too. Looking forward to having him on in the future. Would love to obviously join up with a come on his show too. But I'm trying to get some more guests throughout this summer here. This is my last week of school with students, so my schedule is really going to open up after this week. Hoping to get some guests on here and have some good conversation with them too. I don't want to just talk about picks, like I did with Byron last week. I thought I tried to ask him a little bit different questions about his process, for example, because I'm all about learning when it comes to this kind of stuff. I will never admit or never say that I'm perfect at this kind of thing because I'm always trying to just improve off of the guests that I have on or the people on Twitter, such as Byron, for example. But there's so many out there. I don't want to list them off because I know I'll forget some. So, yeah, trying to get some more guests on here in the summer. If you want to be on the show, let me know. So yeah, ownership here quick before we head out. And I got a question on Fleetwood. I do like Fleetwood this week. Let me pull up his stats here recently. I could see Fleetwood doing well. It looks like his DK price is 8,800. His ownership right now is at 14%. Obviously, that can go up or down depending on how the week shakes out. I could see him getting some buzz though, as far as content shows goes. So I could see that going up instead of down. So Fleetwood's chances. Let's pull up Fleetwood and how he's done at Colonial over the years. He's been playing really well so far this season. He's just ball striking the absolute heck out of the ball. He's green all across the board in all major stat categories. He's actually green in the last 5 years in all major stat categories. T5 last week at the PGA Championship, T59 at the Byron Nelson, which isn't too surprising. Birdie Fest, of course, I wasn't shocked by that. 10th at RBC, 14th at the Masters. So yeah, he's been really showing some great results recently. He's gained strokes on approach in the last 3 rounds. He gained strokes in all major stat categories last week at the PGA. I think this would be a really solid course fit for him as well. It actually looks like he has no results. He's never played at Colonial before. So curious on maybe what's leading him here this year. But that maybe would be one thing that would, make me hesitate a little bit before throwing the hammer down on Fleetwood. But I could also see that lowering his ownership a little bit. 14, that's not too low. So yeah, I think he's got decent chances. The reason or the one thing that would lead me to bet him is just his recent form. He's ball striking the crap out of the ball again. He's gained strokes on approach in the last 3 events, gained strokes off the tee in the last 2. Really solid all across the board all season long. He's only missed two cuts No, 1 cut. Yeah, you can't count the Zurich, really. I don't count that as a cut. So, yeah, he's only missed 1 cut. That came way back in February. Yeah, lots of top 10s. I think Fleetwood's a great play. I like that quite a bit. Solid call there. I will open it up to questions one last time here before we head out. Before we get going, again, don't forget about the awesome stuff that is presented by Fantasy Points all week long. You can check out Pat James' stat model on Fantasy Points right now for Fantasy Points PGA subs. Dom will have his FanDuel picks out tomorrow and a premium betting stream, in addition to Matt's DFS show for subs, of course. Chris Murphy has, again, that terrific DFS DK tiers article out each week. And then Matt and Dom's live stream. That is a free live stream on YouTube and Twitter. That is out Wednesday nights at 7 Central, I think 8 Eastern each week. So, all right. If I don't have any other questions here from you guys, again, you can always reach out to me at Huntman10 on Twitter. You can always hit up my DMs. I think I reply to just about every DM that's ever been sent to me. So, again, I told you all a little bit ago, I love the interaction. That's why I do this. It's a blast for me. So, appreciate you all watching. Good luck this week. And I'll see you all next week for the memorial. Have a good night.